Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I like Zalum better. I don't know why.
Yeah, I like Zalum too, but you have to realize that my homeland has been attacked by so many people that they really, they have fears of spies and other people, so it's better to have an Armenian name there.
Mhm. So I knew she's your Armenian name.
Right, and Zalum is my spiritual name.
Okay.
And so both of my parents are Armenian, and I was never taught Armenian history, culture, or language. It was a very assimilated upbringing, and I never knew about the Armenian genocide. And only when I went to UCLA and was looking in the library and I looked into Armenian, it was talking about these horrible massacres. And I went home and I asked my mom, and she said, well, I didn't want you to be sad. That's why I didn't tell you about it. But then, she had put me in this Zionist neighborhood because she thought I could get a better education. And every day I was discriminated against, even one day in the math class, I stood up and I said, Dr. Greenblatt, if you all think that you are the most intelligent people in the world and God's chosen people, how come I got the highest score on the math test? So I was always fighting racism daily. And then when I discovered
what did he say?
Genocide, he didn't say anything, of course. and so I was like, oh my God, I've been surrounded by the Jewish Holocaust day and night, and here we have the Armenian genocide, which is just as bad, and it's almost in some ways worse because nobody knew about it. The Turks are very vigilant about lying about that it ever happened and denying it and punishing anyone who ever mentions it. And it was a crime in their country to mention it. And you could have your, before your tongue cut out if you spoke Armenian. And they did all these things, when they, this is what conquerors do to erase the truth and as colonial settlers take over your land and act like, you don't exist. So then I found out about the Armenian genocide. So then I
in high school.
I made it. No. I liberated myself from that Zionist high school by taking an SAT test and getting high scores and just walking out and going to university. And so then I ended up in Berkeley, and this is in the 70s. And there's all these wonderful, political things. They had the Black Panthers, they had AIM, they had, Puerto Rican liberation. And,
what year was this?
And, the 70s, 72.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had never heard of the Armenian freedom struggle. And one day, at the place where they held these radical political stuff, they had something on Armenian political prisoners. And I didn't even know there was Armenian political prisoners. And I just didn't know anything. And it turns out that there had been this movement called the Armenian Secret Army, because what happened is that in 1915, the Turks in the Ottoman Empire had decided to kill all the Armenians in Turkey, even though, we were the indigenous people of that region. We were connected to the Uraturs, and we had 5,000 years of history. But this is also the crossroads of the Middle East. If you look at it on a map, today, Anatolia is mainly eastern Turkey, but that's really occupied Western Armenia, where most of our land is, and that they came and brutally decided to kill all of us. So in 1915, there was this triumvirate of Turkish leaders, and they sent messages to the mayors of each Armenian village. Take the Armenian men out first and shoot them, or do something. Kill them, and then take the women and children on deportation marches into the Syrian desert to die. And where did they get this idea? they got this idea from the Herero genocide in Namibia, which was the first genocide of the 20th century. The Germans, had invaded the Herero territory in Namibia. And, the Namibians, they didn't know, the sneaky ways that the Germans were going to trick them into signing this and that. And then, they had a rebellion when they realized that the Germans really wanted to steal their land. And so the Germans decided to kill all of them by pushing them into the Kalahari Desert. And they were successful in that genocide. And even today, if you go online, the Hereros are petitioning for reparation. And it's not a well-known genocide. Anyway, so some of those German officers that were in Namibia doing this Herero thing, eventually they ended up in Turkey, and they told the Turkish, leaders, well, this is a good way to get rid of the Armenians, just push them all into the Syrian desert, first kill the men and get the women and children. So on April 24th in 1915, and actually, April 24th here in New York, we had a commemoration it's a worldwide commemoration for the Armenian genocide, because this is the day that they, in Armenia, the Turks arrested the leaders of the Armenian community.
What date was that?
April 24th, 1915. So they rounded up 200 of the leaders, like political party leaders, and also intellectuals, and just people that were trying to encourage people to think for themselves and have liberation. And they rounded them up and put them in jail. And among them was this Sayat Nova. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a famous musician. And so then after they rounded up the leaders, they sent secret messages to the mayors of each village to take the men out, and then they put up notices in each village, that, because that World War I is going on then, and, you're an enemy of the state, and for the safety of Turkey, we're going to deport you, and you have 3 days to, lock up your house and put all your possessions in a wagon and, be deported to, somewhere, Syria. And so, meanwhile, the Turks were they were eyeing all the Armenian possessions because they had just lost the war in the Balkans. And this was the Turkish Empire was fading a little bit, and they wanted to steal the Armenian houses. And we had, these beautiful grape vineyards and beehives and orchards, and we're a very gardening people. And so they went, and what they would do is they would go to a village, and after the men had been, they would take someone and skin them alive and put them on a pole and say, if you don't convert to Islam, or you have a choice, you can convert to Islam or you're going to be deported. So they did that to scare people. So people frantically tried to put their possessions in a wagon, of course, and they couldn't, they had to leave so much behind because you can't carry everything in a wagon. And so then they're on the deportation road, and the Turks had released Kurdish prisoners to come and attack the deportation caravans. So they would go and at night steal the women and rape the women, and everyone would hear the women, who were being raped cry out. And also they were capturing Armenians as slave brides. And then they were also capturing Armenian children as indentured servants. And so, and they were, they were very cruel. They really enjoyed torture. And, for instance, the Circassians, and the Chechens, they would see how many babies they could kill with one sword. They would, have these games where they would play football with heads. They like cutting off heads of people. They, they would go into a village and say, okay, everyone into the village square, and then put hay over them and watch them for days burn alive. And in all different parts of Western Armenia, these deportations and tortures were going on in various ways. In the plain of Mush, it was divided by 3 Kurdish chieftains. And by fire and sword, in one day, they just went through the plain of Mush, and in every village they killed 75,000 Armenians in one day. And so then from 1915 to 1923, this was the Armenian genocide. They destroyed 4,000 Armenian villages. They obliterated 500,000 Armenian historical and cultural artifacts. They, in the end, it was really 1.5 million to 2 million Armenians were killed. And this was also kind of a Christian genocide because they were also the Assyrians, 850,000 Assyrians and Pontic Greeks. They were also being kidnapped and killed. And the thing is that, I'm not really into these patriarchal religions, but, I think that it's amazing that these Ottoman Turks came from like Mongolia, that part of the world. And that's like where Genghis Khan, came, and like Genghis Khan, he had killed 11% of the world population. He raped so many women that the genome changed, and it's that part of the world where they're coming, and like we weren't invaders, we were like gardeners and craftsmen and tradesmen, and so we didn't have the mentality to cut off someone's head and do all of that. So myself, I told you my family never told me about this, and I'm like, wow. And once I found out about it, it was like a bomb in my life, and I had to be involved. And so I'm at UC Berkeley, and I belong to the Armenian Students Association, and we put photos of the genocide in the library for April 24th, which is our commemoration date. And these are photos of real photos of Armenian skeletons in a field. All the Armenians they chopped up and their bones are there. And, how they, and so the Turkish consulate calls up UC Berkeley and says, these are lies. We're going to sue you unless you take this down. And so my university that I paid tuition for took them down. And so then we put the pictures in Spiral Plaza on the table, and I'm sitting at the table, and this student walks by and says, how can you make up these things? And I'm thinking to myself, how insane is this guy? Where am I going to get, 1,000 skeletons and skulls in a field and take a picture of them? And I was so angry. I took the photos to Kinko's, and I made 1,000 copies, and I plastered them all over Berkeley at night. And this was my first political action. And I haven't stopped because, to me, I don't like being invisible. I don't like it that, the Armenian genocide wasn't included in things. And I think that genocide is the most extreme form of racism.
Yes.
And I tried to join racism groups because, I realized that when I was born, somewhere in the world, there was someone that wanted to kill me, namely the Azeris and Turks that are really for colonial land theft, And so what happened is I did all these interviews with survivors, and I learned so much from them. Like, these were mainly older women, that had survived, and they're talking about how, the Turks come and kill their parents in front of them and kidnap all the pretty women, and they are, they're like slaves.
But didn't you at some point go to try to change things around, fight for...
Yes, what happened? Okay, so it's a long story. So then there I am interviewing survivors, and I am doing my best to I joined women of color groups because I wanted to say that not everyone that looks white is white, and that I represented the Near East, which is an ancient part of the world that people need to know about in terms of, a circle of solidarity of women of color. And I, of course, was met with a lot of resistance. I was called the black wannabe, and I was called spy and all these things. And I'm just trying to present the history, my own personal cultural history, and it was very, very difficult. But I persisted, and after years, finally, they would accept me as a light-skinned woman of color. But then I didn't have backup from my Armenian community, because after the genocide, which was so traumatic, I mean, we're talking about women that had been sheltered all their lives and not even out of the house, and all of a sudden the Turks come and kidnap them and force them to march naked through the streets of Turkish villages. And you can imagine how traumatic that was for them. And many of them just held hands and jumped off of cliffs. And then, even just going through the genocide, everyone's starving and just, anyway, so when they ended up here, they didn't understand that the Statue of Liberty, that they're on native land and that this is stolen land, and they didn't understand about the freedom of the indigenous people here, and they'd never even heard of the word indigenous, and so all they wanted to do was pass and assimilate and, become materialistic successful, and so they weren't into joining with other freedom struggles. In fact, they were very conservative, and in fact, they found out that when they came here, they were listed as Asians. We're really, this is Anatolia is really Western Asia and the map. So they actually petitioned to get their identity changed from Western Asian to white so that they could buy houses, because that's what they wanted. They just wanted security after having gone through so many tortures and seen so many horrific things. So there I am. I'm at the Women of Color group. I finally get accepted as a light-skinned woman of color, but then if anyone goes out and talks to Armenians on the street, oh, no, we're not a light-skinned women of people of color, we are white. And so I had no backup. And then we had all these awful people like Governor of California, George Dukmagian, who was an Armenian, who was totally conservative and totally oppressive. And I'm like, but I had my ancestry. I had my ancestral memory of being an indigenous Armenian from way back, and I had that. Somehow my ancestors wanted me to preserve that. So then, energetically, one day I'm in bed with my lover, and it's 1988, and I turn on the TV, and I see the Armenian earthquake. And to tell you the truth, I didn't even really know much about Eastern Armenia. I had focused most of my attention on occupied Western Armenia and the genocide that my family went through there. And then there's Eastern Armenia. And what had happened is that when the Turks took our land, most of it, was in Western Armenia, and then 10% got into the Soviet Republic and the independent Republic of Armenia, and that was there. And so, and then that's where the earthquake was. And then, so I told my lover, you know what? I have to go there and help. Because I'm an artist. I thought, well, I'll just teach art therapy to the earthquake victims, the children. And so I applied for a visa to go to my homeland, and they wouldn't take me because I was an American. And this was actually the Soviet Union, and they didn't really like Americans at that time. And so it took me years to be able to get a visa. Finally, my friend said, I'll just say you're my relative and send you to this village for a month, and you can go. So I get to Armenia, finally, and I'm in this village, and after a month, my visa's up, and I go to the visa office, and I'm crying. I didn't want to go back. I said, I can't do everything I have to do in a month. So finally they extended it, and I'm in the youth hostel, and on the third floor of the youth hostel is this guy, Monte Melkonian. And I didn't know that he was part of the Armenian secret army, and I didn't know that he was a freedom fighter that was gathering arms to defend Artsakh, and I'd never heard of Artsakh. And so he just said to me, because I'd known him at UC Berkeley, he was part of the Armenian Students Association. In fact, he had helped organize that. He did it in the library. So then he said, well, I need help. Can you come with me and, videotape the soldiers because they don't have anything and we need help? And I said, sure. And then I go to the Artsakh visa office, and this guy says to me, don't go with him. There's a contract out on him because, and I said, well, I have many problems, but I'm not worried about that. So then I go with him and the soldiers to Artsakh in the helicopter where they're firing at us, and we land, they're marching me, and the kids rush up to me, and they say, are you a boy or a girl? And I said, I'm a girl. And then they said, well, how did your parents give you permission to come here by yourself? So anyway, I was living with the soldiers, and it was, I'd never seen a war. I'd never seen so many headless bodies and bodies without eyes and ears. And I realized I had to take a lot of photos as documentation to tell people back home what was going on here. And
did your mother know you were doing all of this?
Yeah, my mother was very angry that I went. She was very angry that I went, that I was fighting her word, because she was worried.
Yeah, yeah.
But see, the thing about my mom is that because my Armenian father was really abusive, his mom had gone through the genocide, and she had all that intergenerational trauma, and her husband died in a sweatshop, and she, his mother had been a sex slave in a Turkish harem. I know. So it was, she didn't want to talk about anything. My mom didn't want to talk about anything.
Right.
And it was totally hard to get any information. I never even got the full information. I just, before my mom died, she was saying, oh, yeah, she was, that's what happened. And my father was placed in an orphanage, and they
had it rough.
He had a lot of trauma. Like one time, I asked him, he had said to me, what do you want for your birthday? And I said, a typewriter. And then he said, he brought me this box, and I opened it, and it said, broken typewriter. And I was crying, why did you give me this? And he said, this is to teach you not to expect anything in life. So that's the kind of person he was. And so the thing is, and so then and because he was so bad, my mother didn't want me. I was a reminder of her mistake. So I was an unwanted daughter. So she isolated me from everything. She put me in this Zionist, terrible neighborhood, and where, again, I was discriminated against every day. And I'm still dealing with that, that unwanted. I'm trying to write a book, actually, about it, because it still affects me. But anyway, so I ended up in Armenia, and I ended up in Artsakh. And then once I got there, because I had told my lover, we agreed I would go there for a year, and then I'd come back. But then at the end of the year, I realized that the situation was so heavy, and I had so many skills that I should just stay there and help these people, and that's what I did. So I sacrificed my love life. But anyway, but then I found out the history of what was going on, and it turns out that Azerbaijan, I guess I have to explain who Azerbaijan is. Okay, so we know where Iran is. Okay, so we know we're Eastern Turkey, that's really occupied Western Armenia, and then to the right is Iran, and then above Iran is actually Azerbaijan to the north, and Armenia is directly above the southern part of Iran, and there's this land which is called Nakhchivan, which had Julfa. And my ancestors on my mother's side are from Julfa, Nakhchivan, but Azerbaijan in the 20s depopulated Nakhchivan because they wanted the land. And if you look on the map, it just says Azerbaijan, but it's really occupied Nakhchivan. And we had this incredible Julfa cemetery with 10,000 carved hotchkars, like gravestones, and the Azeris bulldozed our graveyard and put up a military base. And this graveyard was actually a World Heritage Site that was supposed to be protected by UNESCO, but Azerbaijan gave $5,000 to UNESCO, and then the wife of the president, Aliyev, she became a board member of UNESCO, and they have been destroying Armenian cultural ancient things ever since. She's, and so that was like in the 90s. There was this freedom struggle, and I was in this war, and it was hard for me because I couldn't really speak Armenian. My mother refused to teach me, and it's a hard language, and I'm not good at languages. But I did whatever I could to help all the time, and I found out the history that in 1988, there was perestroika where Armenians could declare independence because Artsakh had been given to Azerbaijan in 1918. After the Allies won the war, they had petitioned to join Armenia, but the British, the BP oil company, and this is the oil thing is the main thing in this whole scenario because Azerbaijan has a lot of oil. And so England would not allow the Armenians in Artsakh to rejoin their motherland, and they gave it to Azerbaijan as an oblast, which means that like a colony, and this was awful because they would discriminate against Armenians in every way. They wouldn't allow Armenians to speak Armenian in the school. They sold things from them. They, were racist in every way. And then in 1988, the Armenians decided to petition for independence. And the Azeris went, Armenians were living in the capital of Azerbaijan, Baku, because they had been going to school there and different things. And they went to every Armenian house and broke down the door and threw Armenians out of windows and raped them and killed them. And these are the Baku and Sungate massacres. And then, of course, the people who did this were never punished. And then so the Armenians fled to Artsakh and then began the Artsakh liberation movement. And I'd never heard of this, but they were doing that, and then that was 1988. And by the time I got there, it was 91, and they were already involved in armed struggle. And, I went to UC Berkeley, where during the Vietnamese War, it was always, they were trying to, peace. But then when I went and I saw this war, I realized that indigenous peoples, their only hope is to have armed self-defense for their own liberation, because all of these United Nations organizations, human rights organizations, are totally powerless and almost phony. Like, for instance, last year, Azerbaijan wanted our land, and so they did a 10-month blockade where no food or medicine was allowed. We petitioned to the International Court of Justice at the United Nations, who agreed that no, they shouldn't be blockading us. This was a violation of our human rights, but they had no enforcement power. And so the blockade continued. People were hungry and died, and weakened. And also when in 2020, we won the war in the 90s because it was aftermath to aftermath. And we were willing to die for our land. In every family, someone died for our child. And then, like, when it came to 2020, what happened is all of a sudden there was Israeli killer drones backed by U.S. Technology and Turkish F-16 bombers. And, also Pakistan supported them. And we couldn't compete against all this technology. By that time it was like a small bunch of Armenians in Artsakh, 150,000, and these are the indigenous Armenians of the diaspora that are willing to die for their land and have all the indigenous things of hospitality and inclusion. And again, they had never heard of the word indigenous. They're not going to join indigenous groups around the world, but I had been going to indigenous groups, and I thought, wow, here I am, because they're so different than the Armenians in California that I had met, and in New York that had dollar signs in their eyes and were totally into capitalism, and that even the Armenian church here in New York, I mean, I can't even afford to go to a lot of their stuff. It's always like they don't have sliding scales. It's not easy. But so in 2020, they invaded Artsakh, and with the Israeli killer drones took 2/3 of our land because they wanted southern Artsakh, and Israel built an airport there because Iran is right next door, and they want to bomb Iran. And so they built an airport there and a base, and that's why they took our land there. But meanwhile, in these wars, where Azerbaijan is attacking us, supported by Israel and the U.S., we now have a lot of POWs. Like when they, for instance, in 2023, this last year, they bombed again. And, women and children ran into the forest to escape the Israeli soldiers who were, they did things like burn children alive in schools. They chopped off children's heads in front of their parents. They then killed the parents. Then they were capturing women, and there's a lot of missing hostages and POWs. And we even have a bunch of POWs which we've been trying to get at, and Azerbaijan doesn't even give us information or respond to things. It's not a country that follows human rights in any direction. But and it's also, there's been a long history of them never being punished. For instance, in 2020, there was a NATO Partnership for Peace in Hungary. And this Armenian lieutenant, Grigin Margarian, he went there to participate in the program. And then at night, an Azeri came with an axe and chopped off his head. And this is in the NATO camp. And so, the guy was taken to jail, but then he was released back to Azerbaijan, where he was hailed as a hero. So it's been a whole lot of Armenophobia. No one's ever been punished for all the bad things that they've done to Armenians. Even, recently there was a lawyer in California. She's licensed to practice in California, and she's tweeting for the eradication of all Armenians. And she's not punished by the Bar Association. Nothing happens to the people who are doing this Armenophobia, and they put up, posters saying, Armenians should die, and it's not considered hate speech. They can just do it, and also, they tell so many lies in the media. The Turks and Azeris are masters of media manipulation and lying. For instance, in the New York Times during the 2020 war, they said that we were, that the Artsakh Armenians were the terrorists. We were the separatist
the talk of the town.
The separatist terrorists. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, we've been there for centuries before the Azeris even came to invade us. And we're not separatists, we're the indigenous people. And they're never mentioning history. None of these newspapers and articles ever mention history. And in fact, when I took all my photos of tortured Armenians, without eyes, without ears, headless, to Amnesty International, and I said, can you publish something about these human rights violations we're going through and help us get justice? And then when they published something, it was like, oh, this is an ethnic conflict on both sides. And I went to them and said, this is not an ethnic conflict. This is an invasion of indigenous people by colonial settlers. And we are indigenous. We've been there for centuries. And the Amnesty International woman said to me, we do not consider history. And I'm like, what kind of colonial organization is this? And that's what you find out, is that all these organizations support colonialism. And because, especially the United Nations, because they use all this language. Like once you're invaded, the colonial settlers have territorial integrity. And I'm like, what is territorial integrity? That just means that's a fancy word for like we give you permission to now live there, and that's really bad. So I'm in this war, and the main thing that I got out of this war is, first of all, I met the bravest people of our nation. Here in New York, there's not that many Armenians that are willing to die for their country, and there. Like I met this woman, Siranush Arishanian, and when the war started, she had white hair. She was 55. She's an older woman, and she wanted to join the liberation movement. And in that part of the world is a patriarchy. It's not like Sri Lanka or places where women, are more accepted in the army. No, and and she said, I'm not here to cook and clean. Give me a gun. And so, they didn't really want women in the battlefield, but it just so happened that she had her own rabbit hunting rifle. and she, at that time they really needed everybody because, there weren't that many people, on the big front line, and they needed people. So she would do things like, stay awake while the other guys were falling asleep at the post. Once the Armenian freedom fighters got divided, and she went across the line of fire and brought them supplies. And she was known as Siranush Aka, which means auntie, and she saved so many lives. And she was just very brave. And then there's like Marguerite Sarkissian, who was a sniper. And it turned out in ArtSoc they taught weaponry. They taught shooting as a class. I never had a shooting class in California, but she did, and she was winning prizes. And then when the war started, she and these other women went to the commander, Arkady Tatuvosian, and when I first went to ArtSoc, first of all, I met the president of ArtSoc, and Artur Magrichian, and he was so humble, and he was so, he was just such a good guy. Of course, they killed him. And then I met the head of, and Arkady is also this wonderful guy, and it was really interesting how you would have these really corrupt guys and then these really good guys all in the same place. And so Arkady said to the women, okay, we're so happy to have you, and he had them trained as a women's battalion of Shishi, and so Marguerite was part of this, and they would go, they would walk for days, and she would hide in trees for days when the Azeris were coming to conquer a village, and one day the Azeris come in with tanks, and they are going to, capture this Armenian village, and she's been hiding in the trees for 3 days, and so the Azeri commander says, "Oh, we've won because they've shot so many Armenians," and he lifts up the top of the tank thing and lifts his head out. She kills him, and then they all run away because they're afraid. And so she saves the village. And she I'd never met Armenian women freedom fighters, and I was honored to walk next to her. And of course, the position of women there is really hard. For instance, she had a friend, and that friend had divorced her husband, who had remarried, but the husband didn't like the idea that his ex-wife was, knew Marguerite or whatever, and he went in front of his ex-wife and killed their son. And he, these guys, we have to say that the patriarchy, the war against women is going on all around the world. It's been that way, since the matriarchy was taken over. And I have done a lot of research about the matriarchy because I feel that it's time for women to have be more empowered to stand up to all these male leaders that are just destroying things, and especially Mother Earth. And, if you look at the planet now, 73% of the wildlife's gone. The ocean is, very damaged. There's so much damage that these guys are doing because they want, they're so interested in material possessions and gathering things. Like here I am in New York, where a lot of people live in concrete apartments. And when you think about it, where does that concrete come from? It comes from the sand from beaches around the world. And they've kidnapped the sand, and the sand has pain being separated from the ocean. Yeah, so people are living in these buildings with the pain of the sand, and they don't realize that that's even going on. And it's, up to women to empower, yourself. And there's so much that we have to, because we had it in the 70s. We had our women's movement, and then it was taken over, and now it's really hard to get it back because there are so many things going on. And I just have to say, I am very proud. I'm very proud of NYU students and their professors standing up to genocide and willing to risk their careers to demonstrate. And I'm proud of all the students and all the campuses that are doing this. And I think that, because when I went to UC Berkeley in the 70s, we were doing this. And then you realize that these universities are actually gigantic capitalistic shopping malls for information. And if you look at who's on the board of these universities profiting by this information business, you realize it's a lot of very conservative industries that are oppressing knowledge and oppressing what kind of professional people you're going to end up with. Because the healthcare profession, for instance, it never used to have insurance like it does now, and that's it's been a very destructive thing to have. It was much better without these gigantic insurance companies. And now you have these students that are actually like indentured servants that have to pay these loans, and they're tied to the banking industry. And who invented money and who invented banking that had such a hold on everything, the housing, the media, the just everything, and mainly the weapon industry, because the U.S. weapons, which are actually being used to kill people in Palestine, have killed Armenians, and around the world are killing people. And Azerbaijan is designated as the site to have COP29, the climate conference, at the end of the year. But you look at Azerbaijan, when they were bombing us in Artsakh, they were using white phosphorus bombs. They took the water from the lake, and they were weaponizing hunger and being thirsty. And they have so much They show hate in their schools. They created a war park where they have wax mannequins of dead Armenian soldiers. And on a family trip, they bring children there to strangle the wax mannequins of dead Armenian soldiers as a photo opportunity. This is their vacation. And so, the hatred of Armenians by the Azeris is very intense. Do you realize they have a postage stamp where they show Armenians as bugs, and the Azeris are holding the bug spray? And so the Azeris are in cahoots with Israel, and Israel is now trying to take over the Armenian quarter in Jerusalem, which has been, we have an ancient quarter there, ancient church, ancient books, ancient knowledge, and they're beating up the protesters. And they, it's really hard to stand up to these gigantic empires that, for instance, Israel is funded a lot by U.S. taxpayers. Why should they have free health care when so many Americans need health care and don't even have it? Why should we be giving them millions of dollars? Why should we be giving the Ukraine over $400 billion in U.S. taxpayers' money when there are Americans homeless and hungry right here? And actually, the Ukrainians are in cahoots with Azerbaijan. They supported Azerbaijan taking over our land, Artsakh. And actually, it's hard, but, I totally support the Palestinian liberation struggle, but there's also this thing that people have to know about, that Hamas and Hezbollah supported Azerbaijan in the Muslim Brotherhood taking over Artsakh. And so this has been very hard for me, because it's all about these patriarchal religions that I can't even relate to, and how they are, destroying humanity. All those 6,000 bombs they put on Gaza, we don't know what's in those bombs. We don't know, those chemicals get around the world, blown in the wind and stuff. We're breathing them. We as citizens, we don't have rights to that knowledge. We are disempowered. And I was proud to be in the Artsakh liberation struggle. So what happened is last year in September 19th, when Azerbaijan heavily bombed Artsakh, and so many people died, and the government of Artsakh, which had been betrayed by the president of Armenia. The CIA came to Armenia, the president, Nikol Pashinyan, and he's a very weak person, and he sold us out to the Turks and Azeris, and he's giving away our land on these fake treaties, and he disempowered the Artsakh army, and then he would not allow the Artsakh government to be in any of the negotiations about what was going on, and he insulted Shushi, which is our cultural capital, saying that it was boring, and the Azeris changed the name to Shusha, and they changed the name of everything when they invaded us. They Stepanakert, our capital. One of the streets is now named after, is called Talat Pasha Street, and Talat Pasha was one of the Ottoman Turks that created the Armenian genocide. And so they're wiping out, they're turning churches into mosques, they're taking all the Armenian lettering off of everything, bulldozing the graveyards, and telling lies constantly in the press that we are the terrorists, and that this region is just really, they're fake news, Western Azerbaijan. There is no such thing as Western Azerbaijan. And because Americans aren't up on history and geography, they can be fed this bullshit without questioning it and just accepting it. They hear it. And Turkey is so good at media manipulation. And when every April 24th we have our demonstration in Times Square. We just had it. And one year on April 23rd, the Turks had their demonstration there, and I went there, and they had these big signs Armenians are liars and killers of children, and they had pictures of Armenians with Pinocchio noses, and they were handing out T-shirts, Armenians no, Turks yes, and they had this gigantic screen. So I took my sign, which said that my grandmother's family was, killed by the Turks, and I had pictures of, they had beheaded Armenians hanging, lynching Armenians. I had those pictures, and I marched around their demonstration. And then they put me on the big screen as, I guess, an enemy or whatever. And then when I was at the Indigenous Conference, I stood up and I said, I would like all the indigenous nations to acknowledge the independent Republic of Artsakh, because we need support, we need allies and friends. And in order to do that, I had to hand in my speech to the translators, because the 6 translators, and then the Turks and Azeris found out that I was going to say this, and then they had come there for the first time to this thing and stood up and called me a liar and had my pass taken away. And it's like they have so much influence. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, was paid a lot of money to go to Turkey and actually to Gaziantep, the very village where my maternal grandmother's family was massacred, and he went there to promote Turkish tourism, Eric Adams. And then he also was given money to make a sister city in one of the places where Armenians were killed with some school in Brooklyn or something. And I have Eric Adams on videotape saying that when he retires, he wants to retire in Baku, Azerbaijan, and let him go there, and he's so corrupt, and they were trying to get him for, helping the Turks do sleazy things with their gigantic building across from the United Nations, but I don't think, he sleazed out of it, probably. He wasn't punished. He's not in jail for corruption anyway, and he's still promoting the Turks all over the place, putting Turks in positions of power, and it's really hard to be in New York. But I love New York because I just love activism. It's the one thing that has helped me deal with the pain of intergenerational trauma, because I realized that I had an affective disorder or something where, it's hard to feel things. I've been working with an Armenian energetic healer to feel things, because I had to, being attacked in so many different directions, it was hard to get my feelings out. And I'm still working on it after all this time. But there's wonderful healers here in New York that I appreciate, but the political organizations that are here in New York, it's mainly been that they're for the Palestinians, and Armenia is never on their agenda. I have to always go, and I'm lucky if I get 3 minutes to say anything, and I'm tired of saying this whole history thing. 3 minutes, so thank you, Gwen, for allowing me this time. And the thing is that, there's no one marching for Artsakh. Thank God there's Jews for, peace, but there's no Azeris for peace. There is no such word in the Azeri language in Turkish that really means peace, because they are relentless predators. Okay, now they've got Artsakh, and now, Artsakh had a lot of minerals. It's the same thing of these colonial settlers, just like, they want the Ben Gurion Canal to get oil and stuff. Now the Turks and Azeris, they want the Artsakh. We had molybdenum, which is important in computers. We had gold, and now their next target is southern Armenia, to have the Zangezur corridor, which connects Azerbaijan and Turkey, and that has trillions of dollars of worth of minerals. And these mining companies, the governor of New Hampshire, before the Azerbaijan bombed and took over Artsakh, he already had a mining deal with them. The ex-governor of New Hampshire. And all these people, they're just like vultures, capitalistic vultures that go in these genocide places to get the minerals and to displace the indigenous people. This is happening to indigenous people all around the world. They've targeted the mining and logging and oil companies has targeted everything, and they put themselves in positions of power. I mean, just think about it. How can Penny and I end up in Azerbaijan when Azerbaijan is one of the most oil-polluting countries in the world? They're buying off all of these things to act like they're good or something, but it's all a lie, and they perpetuate it. And a lot of Americans have no political consciousness. They're not interested in politics in a certain way of digging deep and finding out history and finding out what does the indigenous freedom struggle mean, what does all the environmental things, how are they all connected. This is a dumbed down education system, and they don't want kids to know much, so they don't present the information. So how are these kids going to get the information about what's really going on? I mean, I'm proud that there are these kids that are, creating revolutions on the internet, like the Black Power movement and stuff. But nowadays, there's a lot of stuff that's not on the internet. I've been looking up stuff. I can't even find it. I can't find, the real history of Artsakh, and they've deleted it. And I looked on Wikipedia, and now it has Shusha, which is the Israelis changed all the names of our ancient homeland. Instead of Shushi, it's Shusha. And I'm like, what? And it's really hard to even know the real name because they've erased it. And so how are these kids going to be educated to know about indigenous freedom struggles? They don't know the ancient names to look them up, and they don't know, So I was in a Armenian warrior, female warrior, indigenous talking elder. I try and go out there all the time. I really try and present a lot of information, and I love flyers, and I have an Instagram account, which is Anush for Justice, ANUSHFORJUSTICE, and I have flyers on my Instagram account, which you can reproduce and pass out. It has maps, because the main thing is maps. People don't know where Artsakh is, occupied Artsakh is. They don't know where occupied Nakhchivan is. They've never heard of any of these places, but we deserve to be a part of the International Action Committee's caring. It's not all Palestine. We can't have selective empathy. Selective empathy is very dangerous. We can't talk about Palestine without talking about the Congo, about Sudan, about Papua New Guinea, all the places that need attention. But the colonial people love it that everyone is just talking about one place and forgetting about the others. And we have to know to stop military aid to Azerbaijan and to and to Turkey. Our taxpayers' money are funding the weapons that are killing Armenians and Palestinians and a lot of other people in the world. And I think also I have if you go on my Instagram, I have a flyer about the women soldiers that were killed, by Azeri bombs. And they're so, what they did is they killed these women soldiers, and then they raped and mutilated their bodies. And they posted photos It's just amazing how they posted. I have a YouTube of Azeri skinning an Armenian alive. I've never seen that. I always wonder, how can someone be alive and they're still doing that? And they posted it for me to see it. They posted them chopping up elderly, so the memory keepers, and they posted pictures of, these women soldiers that they mutilated. So I wrote a poem for one of these women. They had cut off her legs and they had cut off her trigger finger because she was a sniper, and put it in her mouth, and she looked terrible, and all the Armenians around the world saw that image, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to change the take on that image. So I wrote this little poem. It says, Azeris are afraid of you, fierce Armenian female sniper defending your ancient Armenian homeland from Azeri invasion. Azeri rapists and murderers captured and mutilated you, put your cut-off trigger finger in your mouth. Now the Azeris are more afraid of your corpse, which is eternally firing at them. Azeris gouts out your eyes and puts stones in them, but Armenian stones can radiate indigenous volcanic strength and survival. Azeris spent time cutting off your legs to discourage other Armenian women to fight back. But we are coming in waves of liberation, pouring out from our starbirth energy, embracing you in our hearts. So I did this for her and, her family, just to have some positive thing out of all that horror. And then also I try and go everywhere and do everything about, culturally trying to get the Armenian genocide in people's consciousness. So I go to open mic at this bar. So what am I singing about? I just took one of those old songs and I kind of rewrote it. It goes, you don't own me. I'm not just one of your conquered women. You don't own me. Don't say I can't think my own way. And don't tell me what to do. And don't tell me what to say. And don't try to steal my ancient Armenian homeland by bombing and murdering and forcing us into exile. You don't own me. Don't try to change me in any way. Don't abuse me. I stand up to stop the Armenian genocide and the war against women. My ancestors created me to be a fierce Armenian warrior fighting for justice. So don't try to assimilate me. I'm old, and I love being old. I'm free, and I love to be free, to live my life the way I want, to say and do whatever I please. You don't own me. I am connected to sacred ancient Armenian power.
Thank you so much for being a part of this program. I'm going to see whether I have to write, find somebody who puts it up on YouTube. It goes on YouTube. So when I find out, I'll send it to you by text.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Zaum, for being a part of this show.
I love you because you represent, what I love. People dedicated to justice. I love the way you struggle for Mamiya for all these years supporting him. I love the way that you talk to people and call me, and I just value you so much. So thank you for having me.
Same here. Same here, and your story is important. They deserve to have a sovereign country of their own.
Yeah,
so, okay.
It's being taken over at this very moment.
Yeah.
The genocide is
sorry about that. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. All
right, we'll talk later, okay?
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you for being a part of the show.
Gwen?
Yes.
So he's doing a Q&A. I wanted to thank the sister for coming on.
Oh, well, because we went over. I'm sorry.
No.